Hi folks, in this video I'm going to be covering how I painted these grim, grimy, mucky robes fit for the swamps on this Rotmire Creed miniature. So without any further ado, let's cue the music. I'm going to start out by mixing a 50-50 mixture of Loren Forest and Mournfang Brown from Games Workshop. And doing this with a little bit of water, I'm creating a murky green-brown colour. We're still going to have these robes read as green, so I prefer to do this 50-50 mix, as it creates a colour that isn't quite an exact match to anything in Games Workshop's range, and it still has those lovely green tones while maintaining that brown dinginess that we expect for someone who's been crawling through muck and mire in disgusting Nurgle-infected swamps. Make sure that you thin this mix enough that it will take 2 or 3 coats to cover this model. Now these are quite detailed model and there's lots of folds and creases in the cloth, and we don't want to block those details up by having too thick a paint. It's very difficult to take back detail from the sculpt when you fill it in with paint. You're better off thinning the paint and making sure that you get a nice smooth coverage later on just by doing a couple of thin coats and taking your time. After 3 thin coats, it is dried to a lovely solid finish, and it's a really yellowy green-brown colour, and you can almost smell the swamp looking at it. So what we're going to do now is start highlighting this colour. For this highlight, I am adding a couple of blobs of Elysian green from Games Workshop into our previous mixture of Mournfang Brown and Loren Forest. And with this, I'm going to be painting most of the flat surfaces of the robe, leaving our base coat in all the recessed surfaces. And I'm remembering to keep it thin so that I get that lovely transition, especially if I come in with a second layer and I paint a smaller area. And there's no real trick to this, as I'm looking at still doing a majority coverage with this colour. I'm just looking at taking my time and covering the areas that are much more raised, leaving a shadow behind. And this colour is a much more yellow ochre colour. We're starting to get some of those more natural green tones coming through. And you could, if you really wanted to, have that more browny, greeny, yellow colour. You could leave it at the end of this stage and have that as your robe colour, but we're going to push it after this all the way up to a more green colour. If you do decide that you like this brown-yellow scheme and you want to define some shadows, you could always come in with some Agrex Earthshade or some Contrast Wildwood, thinned down, and do it as a panel line or a recess wash into the deepest, darkest folds of the cloth. In the green finish that we're going to go for, we're not going to use a wash as such, because we're going to let the layers and different colours that we've got sort of mix and merge, allowing us to have that natural transition of colour and use that for our highlights and shadows. But if you wanted to just do a simpler yellow, brown, green sort of colour, you could use a wash to define a further shadow and call it a day with these robes. I'm coming back in with the second pass of this colour, and I'm focusing on a smaller area than I did last time, and I'm using this to start to define some of the folds and the shapes. You don't have to do this step, especially if you're laying up a few more colours, but if you really want to start defining some folds and shapes in the cloth, then I'd always recommend doing a second pass of a colour, picking out a lesser surface area than your previous pass of the same colour. The last stage of highlighting, I'll be adding a couple more drops of Elysian green into our previous mixture, and with this I'll be looking to build some texture into the cloth. And with this I'm doing short, sharp lines, picking out all the raised edges and folds, and on the flatter areas do more deliberate, straight, slashing, straight motions with the brush. I would recommend making sure that with each pass you do with this, that you pick a smaller and smaller area of colour each time. As you can see, I'm doing with this flat area, and I'm really building up a lovely transition of colour, and it really gives us that green mottled brown effect. Moving round to the front of the model, you can see there are a lot more defined edges and ridges in the cloth. And with this, I'm trying to pick out where the light would hit the most, and really start to change this from a browny yellow to a green colour. I'm not covering much area here, I'm really just trying to create a tonal shift rather than painting over everything we've already done in previous stages. For the last highlight, I'll be using Elysian green from Games Workshop, and I've thinned this down on the palette with a little bit of water, and for this I'll be picking out the most raised areas of the folds in the cloth and doing pretty much an edge highlight with this colour. I will also be using this to add some texture into the cloth, and I'll be doing some short, sharp vertical motions, doing a top to down motion with the brush, and this allows me to pick out some of the more flatter areas and give the illusion of cloth. And if you think that these slashes of paint have got too close together, then you can rinse your brush off and with a wet brush come in and do some merging of the paint and start to separate those thin lines. And then you can come back in and redefine it if you think that you need to come back in with your Elysian green. And it's just a matter of going around the model and picking out all of those raised edges in the cloth. And take your time with this and try to focus on being neat. And with that last highlight applied, these Rotmire Creed robes are now complete. If you enjoyed this tutorial, why not consider subscribing, and I thank you if you've made it this far all the way through the video. If you subscribe, you get further videos just like this one in your YouTube feed, and if you hit that notification bell, you sort out that weird YouTube algorithm that doesn't like to push videos. So, until next time folks.